Are you sure you purchased a first-class ticket? Each word dipped in sugary contempt. At Gate B17, in the heart of Dallas-Fort Worth International, a black woman in a navy coat stepped up with a first-class ticket and was met with a smile sharp enough to cut steel. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cause a scene. But within 7 minutes, the boarding gate froze. By noon, the entire terminal was collapsing under a storm no one saw coming. Because what they didn't know was that the woman they tried to erase owned the system they worked for. And when Monica Harris pulled the plug, vendors vanished, routes got cancelled, and careers fell like dominoes. This isn't just a story about discrimination. This is a masterclass in corporate revenge executed in total silence. So hit subscribe if you believe power doesn't always shout, it strategizes. Drop a comment with your city and tell us, what would you have done if this happened to you? You're about to witness how a smile can strip dignity. And how silence can destroy an empire. At Gate B17 of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, under the sterile blue fluorescence of the early morning terminal lights, Monica Harris stood motionless, her gloved fingers wrapped tightly around the handle of a worn but elegant chestnut leather carry-on. She had flown in overnight from Bogota, Colombia, and was in the final stretch of her journey to Seattle, where a board meeting at Harris and Beckman Global awaited her presence in just over 5 hours. Every detail had been calculated, from the 90-minute layover to the priority baggage routing, except for this moment. She stood alone, not because she wanted to, but because she'd been placed there isolated by a string of seemingly neutral actions. It began when she reached the check-in counter. The agent, a woman in her 30s with frosted blonde hair pulled into a tight bun and a peach blazer that seemed too bright for 5 a.m., barely looked up. Her name tag read, Caitlin, in bubbly cursive font. The smile that formed on her lips wasn't genuine, it was rehearsed, and quickly slipped into something sharper as soon as Caitlin took a closer look at Monica. Monica greeted her with a soft, good morning, her voice touched with a subtle southern lilt that hinted at her Mississippi roots. Caitlin's eyes flicked from Monica's face to her ID, then back again, and her expression shifted just slightly, but enough. Well, Caitlin said, almost under her breath, but with just enough volume to sting. That's quite the accent. You here on vacation? No, I'm flying to Seattle, Monica replied calmly, handing over her first-class boarding pass along with her driver's license. Caitlin began typing. Her nails clicked against the keyboard like impatient drumbeats. Then, with a pause that felt performative, she tilted the screen away from Monica and pursed her lips. That's strange, Caitlin said with faux concern. Looks like there's been a change. You've been moved to seat 32D economy. Monica didn't flinch. I booked 1A, she said, her tone even but firm. Well, Caitlin replied, her grin tightening, sometimes the system just autocorrects these kinds of things. You'd be more comfortable in the main cabin anyway. Less pressure. Monica didn't answer. She simply stood, processing. Around her, the terminal hummed with activity, families juggling strollers, suited executives juggling coffee and emails. None of them paid attention to the quiet erasure unfolding before them. The act wasn't loud. It wasn't cruel in the traditional sense. But it was unmistakably dehumanizing. Caitlin leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. Are you sure you purchased a first-class ticket? She asked, each word dipped in sugary contempt. The question struck like a slap disguised as a whisper. Monica could feel the heat rising behind her ears, but she didn't let it show. She reached into her coat and retrieved the printed itinerary booking confirmation, seat 1A, first class, non-stop. Caitlin didn't look at it. She was already greeting the next passenger, a white man in wrinkled khakis and a Seahawks hoodie, boarding pass barely intact. Her voice lifted, sweetened. Mr. Langford. Welcome back. First class right this way. No verification. No question. Just an easy path forward. Behind Monica, someone in line muttered, always holding things up, and a woman a few spots back let out an audible sigh. Monica remained still. She had spent the last 15 years of her life building a reputation in boardrooms across 3 continents. She had negotiated multi-million-dollar contracts in 4 languages. She had testified before Senate subcommittees on global supply chain ethics. And yet here, in this sliver of space between gate and plane, she was no longer Monica Harris, the COO of one of the West Coast's top logistics firms. She was simply a black woman with a gentle accent who didn't look the part. Eventually, a man in a gray vest arrived. His badge read, Tray Floor Supervisor. He didn't make eye contact with Monica as he spoke. "There's no error," Trey said flatly. "The system reassigned your seat. It's final. You can't override it?" Monica asked. "No, ma'am." There was no apology. No reason. No effort to understand. Just a shrug, the sort that said you should be used to this by now. And maybe she should have been. But instead of anger, something else began to form in Monica's mind: clarity. She looked across the gate area. A toddler screamed near the vending machines. A group of 20-somethings scrolled their phones at the charging station. A pilot paced behind the boarding counter. Life went on. Her mistreatment went unnoticed, or worse, was silently endorsed. Behind the gate, 2 airline employees stood chatting near the service podium. One of them, a red-headed woman named Lexi, tilted her head toward Monica and whispered, "That's the one they moved down." "Yeah," said the man beside her. "She was booked in 1A. Didn't look the part, though, huh?" Lexi smirked. "Guess not." Monica heard every word. She didn't react. She simply noted. She wasn't just being reassigned. She was being repositioned socially, economically, and symbolically. Not because of her behavior, her credentials, or even a technical glitch, but because someone decided her presence was incompatible with the optics of Seat 1A. No outrage was necessary. The cruelty was effective in its restraint. The damage, by design, was silent. Monica Harris stood tall, her grip tightening on the leather handle of her carry-on. Her silence wasn't submission. It was preparation. And the system, so confident in its casual erasure, had no idea what it had just awakened. Monica Harris remained near the periphery of Gate B17, her boarding pass still clutched in her hand like a quiet protest. Around her, the terminal surged forward. Boarding announcements crackled overhead, muffled by the buzz of idle conversations and rolling luggage wheels. But to Monica, the world around her had gone strangely still. Her eyes stayed fixed on the gate counter where Caitlin and Trey continued their seamless choreography of selective courtesy. They weren't hostile. They weren't loud. In fact, if you glanced casually, it would seem like nothing at all had happened. That was the brilliance of it. This wasn't prejudice that shouted. This was a system trained to smile while shuffling people out of place, to rearrange access while maintaining plausible deniability. And Monica was not the first. She would not be the last. Behind the counter, Caitlin's tone lifted again, cheerful and welcoming, as she greeted an older white couple now approaching the desk. "Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, right on time. First class, Group 1, you're welcome to pre-board. No verification. No ID check. No scrutiny." Monica glanced down at her own app. Her seat, 1A, was now marked occupied. There was no record of any error, no acknowledgement of the change. It was as if she had never belonged there at all. She turned slightly and took a seat near a glass divider overlooking the tarmac. Beyond it, her aircraft was being loaded, white fuselage gleaming under morning light, baggage carts weaving in and out like worker ants in a colony. The scent of jet fuel lingered in the air, blending with burnt espresso from a nearby kiosk. Monica watched without blinking. She had seen enough to understand now, this wasn't incompetence. It was culture. Just then, a white man who had been behind her in the check-in line earlier, a middle-aged, broad-shouldered man in khakis and a polo shirt, approached the gate again. His body language was casual, confident. His boarding pass looked crumpled in his hand, half folded from being stuffed in a pocket. He leaned over the counter and whispered something to Lexi, the red-headed agent Monica had overheard. Lexi let out a small laugh. "Let me see what I can do," she replied. She didn't check his ID. She didn't verify his class. She simply typed, smiled, and handed him a new slip. "You're good to go. Group 1. Monica watched him stride past the other passengers and through the jet bridge entitled, effortless, unquestioned. She didn't sigh. She didn't roll her eyes. She simply watched the door close behind him. That, she realized, was the difference. The man didn't have to ask for dignity. It had already been assumed. Moments later, Monica's phone buzzed. She opened the notification and updated seating chart. Her original seat, 1A, was now labeled under another name. A name she didn't recognize. One that wasn't hers. Her jaw clenched. Still, her posture never changed. She stood again, moved slowly back toward the glass, and let her gaze sweep over the gate area. A young mother tried to soothe her crying infant by bouncing gently in place. A trio of executives huddled around a tablet, their screen filled with spreadsheets. Life, again, moved forward. And Monica? She had become invisible. To most of the people here, her story had already ended. That was when she noticed something odd. Two employees near the podium, Lexi and a tall man with salt and pepper hair and a tight jawline, were speaking quietly. Half behind the podium, half hidden, their voices low but their eyes occasionally flicking in her direction. Lexi's smirk returned. "That's the lady from earlier?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. "She was on the manifest for 1A. But, she didn't really fit." They didn't laugh. They didn't need to. The dismissiveness in their voices carried the same weight as mockery. The kind that didn't make jokes but made decisions. Monica didn't move. She didn't flinch. Her fingers adjusted slightly on the leather strap of her carry-on, and she took mental inventory of everything she had just heard. Lexi. Mike. The conversation. The words. The time. It was all noted. Minutes passed. Then the first boarding call rang out over the speakers. Group 1. First-class passengers. Pre-boarding. Monica remained seated. This wasn't her moment to act. It was her moment to observe, because the pattern was becoming clear, and the story she was documenting was larger than this gate, this airport, or even this airline. The final straw came shortly after. A notification on her phone, boarding position reassigned. Please proceed to gate B19 for departure. B19. That wasn't her gate. It wasn't even her flight number. They weren't just moving her from a seat. They were trying to erase her completely from the boarding process, from the manifest, from consideration. The cruelty of it wasn't in a single action. It was in the accumulation of small, seemingly benign acts that built a wall so high no one could see over it. Still calm, Monica returned to her seat and retrieved her carry-on. She opened her notes app, tapped open a private, encrypted folder titled Incident Log, DFWA, and began typing. Time, 7:24 a.m. Gate, B17. Original seat, 1A/reassigned, 32D, Economy. Staff, Caitlin, check-in, Trey, Supervisor, Lexi, Gate Agent, Mike, Floor Ops. Audio overheard, didn't fit the part. Action taken, unverified seat reassignment without explanation. She paused, added a line. New boarding location, Gate B19, not booked. Then she closed the note, locked the screen, and slowly looked back toward the gate counter. There was no yelling. No confrontation. No scene. Just a stillness that spoke of something much deeper: strategy. She had no intention of letting the moment slip into oblivion. She knew what they didn't. This story would not end at the gate. Monica Harris remained seated near Gate B17, her carry-on upright beside her and her phone silent now. She hadn't moved in several minutes, but her mind had already traveled miles. The reassignment wasn't a glitch. The gate change wasn't protocol. It was the architecture of erasure, polished, polite, and devastatingly efficient. That's when he arrived. A supervisor wearing a navy vest and a clipped badge that read, "Gordon, Terminal Management," approached her with the kind of practiced smile reserved for customers labeled delicate. His presence didn't alarm Monica, it confirmed her suspicions. They were moving into the next phase. "Ma'am," Gordon began, his tone warm, his stance firm, "we understand you've had a bit of trouble with your boarding experience." She met his gaze. "I've done nothing but ask why my first-class seat was reassigned without explanation." He nodded, a little too eagerly, as if he was checking off a box labeled "Appear empathetic." But as he continued speaking, his eyes betrayed him. They kept darting toward the far wall where two DFW airport officers stood beside a service desk, posture stiff, eyes trained on her like she was a loaded question. "We'd like to ask that you step away from the boarding zone for now," Gordon said gently, motioning toward a lounge area to her left. "Just to keep the area flowing for other passengers." Monica blinked once, slowly. "You're removing me from the boarding area for asking a question?" "No one's removing you," he said quickly. "We're just asking for cooperation, so this doesn't escalate." That word. Escalate. It hung in the air like a threat wrapped in courtesy. Monica stood without raising her voice. "I'll wait in the lounge," she said. "But I expect a written explanation for the reassignment. And I'll be requesting access to the security footage of my interaction with staff." Gordon's smile faltered. Just for a second. But in that flicker, Monica saw the crack. "Of course," he said with a nod, though his eyes had gone cold. "We'll make that available." She walked calmly to the nearby lounge. The officers didn't follow, but their gaze did. As Monica passed, she noticed a small group of travelers tracking the exchange, whispering behind lattes and neck pillows, but none of them intervened. That was the genius of the system, it never got loud. Once seated in the lounge's corner booth, Monica pulled out her phone again. She accessed a protected folder on her cloud, an internal compliance file maintained for corporate oversight. She uploaded her earlier note, timestamped the interaction, and began a new entry. She barely had time to write before her phone buzzed again. 3 new alerts from Tamron, her legal assistant back in Seattle. Subject line, "Inbound media inquiries, your name is trending." She tapped open the thread. Attached were screenshots of her photo taken from a distance, cropped and shared in a private social group called the Sky Suite Crew. The caption beneath it read, "This one's about to pop off. Says she had 1A. Sawyer, girl." Laughter emojis. Snarky comments. Not one of them kind. Monica didn't gasp. Didn't flinch. She had expected this. People didn't need to scream at you to humiliate you. All they needed was a shared understanding that you didn't belong and a system willing to nod along. She began saving each image. Archived each comment. Logged names. Not out of vengeance. Out of diligence. These weren't insults anymore. They were evidence. The lounge filled quickly with passengers waiting on delayed flights. Monica stayed apart, head down, collecting digital shrapnel. A woman and child sat nearby, playing a tablet game. A businessman adjusted his neck pillow and groaned about schedule changes. No one looked at her. That was the final design of this machine, it trained witnesses not to see. Except one did. He had been sitting 2 rows behind her earlier near the main windows. Mid-40s, South Asian descent, tailored jacket, wireless earbuds hanging loosely around his neck. He hadn't said anything during the earlier exchanges. But now, as final boarding for Monica's original flight echoed overhead, he stood. He walked directly to the counter. Lexi was back at the podium, scrolling her screen with casual disinterest. "Excuse me," he said, placing his boarding pass down. "Can I ask why that woman was moved from first class?" Lexi blinked, clearly surprised. "Sir, I'm not at liberty to discuss another passenger's itinerary." "He didn't move. You made it public when you reassigned her in the middle of the terminal." Lexi stiffened. You humiliated her," he continued. "I think I'm entitled to know what policy justifies that." Just then, Gordon reappeared behind the podium. "Sir, I'm going to need you to return to your seat. This situation doesn't concern you." The man crossed his arms. "It concerns me because it's wrong." Gordon's tone darkened. "If you continue this, we'll have to report your disruption as well." The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He paused, nodded once, and turned away, not in defeat, but in recognition. He had spoken up, and the system had done what it always does, protect itself. As he walked past Monica's seat, he looked her way, silent, but solid. A nod passed between them. Not just of acknowledgement, but of shared understanding. She nodded back. That was all they could do for now. Monica didn't need a crowd. She didn't need a camera. She needed only this, the truth, the documentation, and the quiet certainty that every time this happened, the evidence grew. One day, the system wouldn't be able to shrug it off. Because today, someone had seen. And tomorrow, someone else would act. Monica Harris sat quietly in the lounge, the muted buzz of the terminal fading behind the thick panes of glass that separated her from the boarding gates. Her hands rested in her lap, but her mind was moving with meticulous clarity. What had begun as a subtle reassignment had unraveled into a calculated pattern, and she was documenting every piece of it. A few feet away, a young flight attendant stood near the gate, adjusting her blazer collar and glancing toward the terminal lounge. Her name was Janelle, and she'd only been flying with Horizon Air for 4 months. Still new, still impressionable. Still paying attention. Janelle had witnessed the reassignment order earlier that morning while prepping the first-class manifest. She had overheard Caitlin and Lexi joking about Monica's accent and presentation. Something about it hadn't sat right with her then, and it definitely didn't now. She turned toward the gate supervisor, Gordon, who stood reviewing a printed log. "I think we mishandled that," Janelle said, keeping her voice low. Gordon didn't look up. "Mishandled what?" "That woman. Monica Harris. She didn't cause a problem. She asked a question. Then we moved her. Then security showed up. That's not protocol." Now he looked at her, expression unreadable, eyes firm. "You've been here 16 weeks, he said flatly. "Yes, sir." "Let me give you some advice," Gordon said, folding the manifest and sliding it into a folder. "Don't get sentimental about passengers like that. You'll burn out fast." Janelle opened her mouth, but the words didn't come. The warning was clear: stay quiet. Stay useful. She turned back to her duties, but the weight of complicity pressed against her spine harder than any galley cart. Back in the lounge, Monica glanced down at her phone and tapped open her private notes. She entered a new log line: incident update, witnessed male passenger confront gate agents, ID unknown. Flight attendant expressed concern, silenced by supervisor. Gate B17/Horizon Air/Flight 602/reassignment confirmed. She then set her phone face down and folded her hands once more. It wasn't just a pattern now. It was a case. One laced with evidence, corroboration, and most damning of all, intent. Her thoughts were interrupted when a uniformed officer approached, posture stiff, voice practiced. "Ms. Harris, we'd like to conduct a routine pre-flight security review." No inflection. No explanation. Just that phrase, routine pre-flight security review, a script used to mask something else entirely. Monica nodded calmly and stood. The officer led her down a restricted hallway. Her heels echoed against polished tile as they passed vending machines, lockers, and sealed gates that led into maintenance corridors. It was sterile, quiet, distant from the public eye. When they reached a small, windowless room with a bolted table and 2 chairs, the officer opened the door. "Someone will be with you shortly," he said, then left, locking the door with a cold metallic click. Monica sat down without hesitation. She didn't pace. She didn't ask questions. She simply waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 13. No one came. No ID was checked. No questions were asked. It wasn't a review. It was a pause. A delay meant to move her out of sight. She stared ahead at the blank wall in front of her, breathing slow and deep. She had dealt with worse buried investors with sharper teeth, outmaneuvered boards that had tried to outvote her. But this? This was different. This was institutional diminishment disguised as procedure. When the door finally opened, it wasn't a senior officer or airline executive, it was a boy, barely out of training, shirt untucked, badge crooked, clipboard empty. He looked startled to see her still there. "They told me someone had already spoken with you," he said, scratching his head. "I was just sent to escort you back." Monica stood, silent. The young man held the door. As she passed him, he muttered, "I don't think they wanted you anywhere near first class." She stopped. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone even. He froze. That's just what I heard one of the supervisors say," he mumbled. "Something about how you didn't fit the brand image. Said it'd be better to put you somewhere less visible." He tried to explain further, something about not agreeing, about not knowing what to say, but Monica simply nodded once. No need to speak. The truth had already been spoken for her. They walked back through the terminal silently. Passengers who had earlier gawked now refused eye contact. Lexi, behind the counter, pretended to be absorbed in her monitor. The man who had taken Monica's seat, who had laughed with the crew earlier, was already on board. Her name was never spoken again. She had been erased from the narrative. And in that absence, the system had revealed its true mastery, not through confrontation, but through silence. Monica retrieved her luggage from the priority tag desk. The monitor showed her suitcase had been reclassified to standard cargo. No reason was given. When she questioned the counter rep, a nervous young man named Drew, he fumbled with his tablet. "It looks like the status was manually changed." "I paid for priority handling," Monica said, voice calm. "I can't reverse it," Drew replied. "It's locked." She nodded once, then stepped aside. No argument. No anger. Just acknowledgement. At Gate B17, far from her original boarding point, Monica sat among travelers with no idea who she was or what she had endured. She opened her phone again, added new notes to the folder labeled Incident Log _HZ_DFW. Luggage rerouted to general cargo despite paid priority. Status override performed manually. Verbal confirmation of bias from junior staffer. Discreet detainment, 13 minutes, no protocol. This wasn't a travel log anymore. It was a dossier. And with every new line, the system buried itself deeper. Monica Harris had returned to the terminal, but she wasn't truly back. Not in the eyes of the staff. Not in the eyes of the passengers who had watched her be quietly removed and then quietly reinserted into the machinery of boarding as if nothing had happened. She had become a ghost in her own journey. At Gate B22, a new gate far from her original departure point, Monica sat down again, distant from the cluster of executives at the bar and the families camped near outlets. This wasn't just a change in seating, it was a removal from visibility. A disinvitation from the elite. She glanced at the monitors. Her flight still showed on time, but something about the rhythm of the boarding process felt off. She looked at her app. Her original seat 1A still displayed a new passenger's name. Her own booking had been stripped, reassigned, and invalidated. No record of the swap, no route back. But her instincts were flashing red now. This wasn't about her anymore. This was about control. She pulled out her phone and opened a secure messaging app linked to her company's global legal infrastructure. Her fingers moved swiftly. Initiate Phase 2. Do not announce. Redirect routing. Suspend vendor account 7642 through DFW indefinitely. Notify legal. She hit send. Her shoulders relaxed. The weight of retaliation was not loud. It was procedural. And it had just begun. As Monica folded her phone and set it aside, a familiar voice called from the counter. "Ma'am," said a tight-lipped woman in her 40s. Her badge read Karen, her tone clipped and irritated. "You're not on the boarding list anymore." Monica approached with measured steps, handing over the same printed confirmation she'd offered earlier, now creased from the morning's constant handling. Karen barely looked at it. "What's this supposed to be?" she snapped. "A confirmation," Monica said, voice calm. "First class seat, priority baggage, lounge access." Karen grunted, yanked the paper from Monica's hand, glanced at it like it was trash, then slammed it back on the desk. "I don't care how much you paid," she said, loud enough for those in line to hear. "You don't belong in first class with that accent." The line behind Monica fell into stunned silence. Karen didn't flinch. "There's a standard in that cabin," she added. "And with all due respect, you don't match it." No one moved. No one intervened. Karen had crossed a line, and she had done it with surgical certainty. Monica took the now wrinkled pass, folded it slowly, and slid it back into her coat pocket. Not a word. Not a look. Just a graceful retreat from the counter. Behind Karen, another agent, nervous, younger, whispered something, perhaps a warning, perhaps an apology. It didn't matter. The damage had been done. At the baggage help desk near Carousel 5, Monica approached to verify that her checked suitcase, tagged for priority first-class handling, had been routed properly. A young staffer named Bryce looked up her records. His expression changed as he tapped through the manifest. "It says your bag was reclassified," he said hesitantly. "Reclassified?" "Yes, ma'am. It was shifted to general cargo. You'll need to retrieve it at the main claim area." "I paid for elevated handling," Monica replied. "Climate-controlled hold. Expedited return." "That's not optional." Bryce nodded nervously. "Yes, ma'am. I see the paid service. But the override was manual. I don't have access to restore it." Of course it was manual. Of course it was deliberate. She nodded once, then turned away. Each step she took now felt choreographed. Not out of defeat but out of determination. She sat down once more, this time near Gate C17, a location so far from her original point of entry that no one would connect her presence to the chaos now brewing across terminals. She unlocked her phone. In her protected file labeled incident log_HC_DFW, she created a new entry. Entry 75, Agent Karen, verbal humiliation, public. Confirmation, bag reclassified to standard hold. Loss of contracted priority services. Escalation request pending. She closed the log, but this was no longer just a timeline. It was becoming a case file, one thick with evidence, coded slights, and systemic malice. And then came the final insult. A new alert popped onto her phone, baggage tracking update. Her suitcase, the one clearly marked with a red VIP tag, had been loaded last into a rear section of the aircraft normally reserved for pet carriers and temperature-volatile crates. Monica opened the camera snapshot from the internal baggage cam. There it was, hanging awkwardly off the zipper like a red flag no one cared to read. She stared at the image, powered down her phone, and leaned back. There was no more need to witness. The message had been delivered. But what the system didn't understand, what it had never understood, was that Monica Harris did not need to raise her voice. Because her voice did not need raising. Seated at Gate C17, Monica Harris looked every bit the composed professional she always had been. Her coat folded neatly over her arm. Her posture upright. Her gaze steady. But beneath the stillness, her next move had already been set in motion. From the inside pocket of her coat, Monica retrieved a second device, not her phone, but a secure, encrypted communication terminal used only by Coleman Harris Global's top executives. Fewer than a dozen people had access to it. It wasn't for texting. It wasn't for browsing. It was for making decisions that rippled across entire industries. She dialed one code. When the connection buzzed once, Monica spoke evenly. Activate protocol echo. Effective immediately. Coleman Harris Global is ceasing all vendor, routing, and logistical operations through DFW International. Freeze Q3 expansion budget and reroute executive traffic to Denver and Phoenix. Notify legal. Priority status, blackout. She ended the call before waiting for confirmation. Because none was needed. Across the terminal, far from Gate C17, the first signs of disruption began to appear quietly. Internal monitors used by staff at Horizon Air began flashing error codes. Lounge access cards were rejected. Partner portals froze. Vendor payment authorizations returned invalid status. A booking representative seated 3 gates down blinked at his screen. "Why are the Coleman Black Tier reservations showing as void?" he muttered. The operations manager for Gate B17 received a call mid-inventory. A voice on the other end told him to halt all preparation for a scheduled Coleman charter flight to Geneva. "What?" he asked, confused. "That flight's in 2 hours." "Not anymore," the voice replied. "Terminal routing has been suspended." Panic didn't hit all at once. It crept in slow, invisible, inevitable. By the time the vendor terminals rebooted, and the first bulk reservation batch returned with cancellation stamps, the systems team had begun to realize something was wrong. In the terminal command center below Gate A, a supervisor leaned over his tech board and squinted at a dashboard now blinking red across 5 zones. "What the hell is going on?" Someone behind him gasped. He looked up at the display board. There it was. Harris Holdings / Coleman Harris Global. Status, operational disengagement, immediate effect. No press release. No warning. No confrontation. Just silence and the total dismantling of institutional dependence. Monica, still seated at C17, crossed one leg over the other. The buzz of the terminal was louder now, a strange undercurrent of radioed voices and confused conversations between staff who had no idea they were watching a system collapse from the inside out. She unlocked her phone again, her regular one this time, and tapped into a shared corporate dashboard. A colored grid showed her company's international flight operations. DFW's quadrant was turning darker by the minute. Rows of routes turned inactive. Partner nodes blinked out one by one. Monica scrolled through the list, verifying each cancellation, each freeze, each vendor shutdown. This was not revenge. This was reckoning by infrastructure. Across the terminal, Gordon, the same supervisor who had accused Monica of being disruptive just an hour earlier, was now being summoned into a crisis meeting. His department's senior vendor liaison had just received 15 emails in under 2 minutes, all from Coleman-affiliated partners, requesting emergency clarification. In the upstairs boardroom overlooking Terminal D, Anderson, Horizon Air's director of corporate partnerships, was sweating through his button-down shirt. He had just read an internal terminal operations memo. DFW vendor routing with Coleman Harris has been suspended indefinitely. Loss of all elite-tier contracts effective today. Escalation to executive emergency response. He stood and raced down the hallway, bypassing 3 confused interns and a logistics coordinator typing furiously into a locked dashboard. He didn't stop until he reached Gate C17. And there she was. Monica Harris. Still seated. Still poised. Still unreadable. He approached carefully, catching his breath. "I wasn't informed," Anderson said, voice low, hoarse. "I didn't know you were flying through Dallas today." Monica stood slowly. Her coat over one arm, her chin lifted slightly. "Apparently," she replied, "no one knew much of anything today." He opened his mouth. Closed it. Then tried again. "The staff involved. This isn't company policy. I assure you, we're investigating." "There won't be statements," she said, voice flat. "There will be restructuring." Her words hit harder than any raised voice. "You allowed this to happen," she continued. "Your people let it escalate. The silence at every level. That was the decision." Anderson took a small step back, stunned. In the command center below, digital maps continued flashing red. Vendor teams attempted to reauthorize services and failed. Coleman Harris Systems locked them out. Airlines that relied on black-tier clients now had no access to elite packages. Entire terminals began losing VIP passenger privileges. This wasn't about money. It was about leverage. Monica stepped past Anderson without waiting for acknowledgement. Her car, a black Lincoln Town car, was waiting beyond the arrivals terminal. The driver opened the door without a word. As she settled into the back seat, Monica opened her tablet and checked for a final confirmation. One of the largest international consortiums affiliated with Coleman Harris, headquartered in Zurich, had just submitted their withdrawal notice from all Dallas-based programs. 2 more from Singapore and Dubai followed within seconds. Each cited the same reason: incompatibility with stakeholder values. Monica closed the tablet and rested it in her lap. In the chaos of the airport, no one would fully grasp what had just happened. Not yet. But in a week, when DFW's quarterly numbers dropped 30%, when vendors sued for breach, when loyalty members filed complaints, and when internal audits exposed the fragile web behind every standard procedure, they would know. And it would all trace back to one moment. One woman. One smile that said, "I don't need your permission. I own the door you slammed shut." The ripple hit faster than anyone at Dallas-Fort Worth International could control. By 11 a.m., flight operation teams across 3 terminals were staring at a wall of red alerts. Lounge access scanners refused entry. Digital manifests froze mid-update. High-tier travelers arriving for connector flights found their boarding groups had vanished. Staff scrambled to reset systems, but the back-end had been locked out, retracted at the root by the Coleman Harris infrastructure, now completely disengaged from DFW servers. Everywhere Monica Harris had once been overlooked, her absence now screamed. In the glass-paneled boardroom on the top floor of terminal operations, Anderson stood before a room full of executives, all pale with panic. The room buzzed with terms like contract violation, fiscal exposure, and urgent legal review. But the most repeated phrase was far simpler: "We didn't know who she was." Anderson didn't speak. He couldn't. He simply pointed toward the central dashboard, where a cascade of cancellations blinked in rapid succession. The last one to populate read, "Rome Charter, Coleman Black Tier, suspended." One of the senior managers, a gray-haired man from vendor relations, slumped in his seat and whispered, "She's not just a CEO. She's our majority client. She funds the routes that hold our international prestige network together." Another executive, this one from Hospitality Coordination, added grimly, "If we lose her, we lose 40% of our seasonal luxury packages." In the silence that followed, no one made eye contact. Everyone was remembering the chain of decisions that had brought them here: a smirk at a check-in desk, a reassignment without protocol, a refusal to acknowledge what their own systems had registered as a priority tier passenger. What none of them realized in that moment was that Monica Harris hadn't just withdrawn money. She had withdrawn trust, a currency that institutions never notice until it's gone. Down on the floor, passengers began noticing something was wrong. Lounge workers whispered about mass cancellations. First-class customers asked why their upgrades weren't processing. One employee muttered something about Coleman Black pulling out, and by noon, the entire VIP desk had shuttered. Meanwhile, Monica's executive assistant, Lena Monroe, now safely at the Coleman Harris Seattle HQ, received a flood of emails from panicked airline representatives. Some begged for clarity. Others for forgiveness. All were marked urgent. She replied with a single template, subject, Coleman Harris Policy Directive, Terminal Blackout DFW. Message, per direct order from the CEO, all Coleman-affiliated travel, services, and vendor privileges have been suspended at DFW International. Any attempt to contact Monica Harris directly will be treated as a breach of incident response protocol. All further communication must go through legal counsel. Back in Terminal B, Karen, the gate agent who had told Monica, "You don't belong in first class with that accent," was still on shift, unaware her fate was already sealed. At 1:17 p.m., she was approached by two uniformed airport security officers and a representative from HR. Her smile faltered the moment she saw the clipboard. She laughed nervously. "Is this about that lady from earlier? I didn't know who she was." But the HR lead didn't flinch. "You're being terminated immediately," he said. "Your actions this morning violated our code of conduct, caused reputational harm, and breached contract terms with multiple vendors." Karen stood frozen. "I didn't mean anything by it." But her excuses dissolved as the officer gently gestured toward the employee exit. Passengers turned. A few recognized her. One even filmed her walk of shame, her name badge visible, her hands clutching a clear pouch of personal items. By 2:30 p.m., two more terminations followed. Ron, the supervisor who had stood idle during Monica's detainment, was dismissed after an internal review found him complicit in multiple policy breaches. His file included phrases like failure to de-escalate and willful disregard of protocol. Even Lexi, the red-headed agent who had mocked Monica's reassignment in private chats, was gone by day's end. Her digital post once hidden in a private employee group had been leaked, screenshot, and distributed not only internally but to external legal channels. Violating digital privacy laws while representing a contracted vendor. Grounds for termination. But the press never named Monica. They didn't need to. A few days later, major outlets ran headlines like, "DFW hit with vendor boycott after VIP passenger mishandled." "Influential black business leader quietly shuts down airport operations with one call." Photos emerged, blurry snapshots of a black woman in a navy coat walking through DFW with poise. None were confirmed. Coleman Harris Global released no statement. And that, perhaps, was what made the story so powerful. The silence became the signal. Within the week, 4 luxury travel agencies removed DFW Preferred from their websites. A tech partner based in Tokyo canceled their Q4 expansion through Texas. A Swiss airline retracted its seasonal charter partnership. Inside DFW, the legal department initiated internal workshops on racial equity and incident de-escalation. But most knew it was too late for optics. This wasn't about one employee, or even one passenger. It was about an entire system trained to make black women feel disposable and what happens when the wrong woman turns out to be indispensable. At a nonprofit summit in Atlanta, a speaker asked a room full of CEOs, "What does power look like in silence?" In the back of the room, someone whispered, "Monica Harris." Monica Harris never returned to Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. She didn't need to. Her absence had become its own presence, one that reshaped operations, rewrote policy handbooks, and left an entire institution tiptoeing around the crater her silence had left behind. Within weeks, Coleman Harris Global finalized its permanent rerouting protocols. All executive traffic was shifted to Denver and Phoenix. Tourism packages once centered on Dallas now launched from Austin or San Diego. Every system once touched by her company, hospitality, ground transport, air charter, concierge, was restructured away from DFW. Vendors who once courted the Coleman name now scrambled to avoid being listed as non-compliant. Internal reviews were launched across multiple airports, looking to identify any remaining Karen culture, that deeply embedded, professionally disguised prejudice that moves in whispers, paperwork, and policy overrides. But the most remarkable shift didn't come from HR memos. It came from people. In Atlanta, a quiet nonprofit organization named Forward Compass received a new volunteer application. The name, Alexis Lexi Harper. The same gate agent who once laughed as Monica was stripped of her dignity. Her message was short, but honest: I don't expect forgiveness. I expect to be better. I want to learn what I refused to see before. And Monica? She never replied. She didn't need to. Instead, Forward Compass added Lexi to their next cohort. A year later, she became a lead facilitator in workshops teaching airport staff across 5 states how to identify bias before it metastasized. Meanwhile, Ron, the supervisor who once ignored Monica's calm requests, completed a leadership certification through a DEI program funded by Coleman Harris Foundation. In his reflection, he wrote, "I wasn't fired because I broke a rule. I was fired because I let the room stay comfortable while a woman was being erased." Now, he trains young transport supervisors in Detroit on conflict resolution, bias interruption, and the cost of cowardice. As for Monica Harris, she moved forward without fanfare. No interviews. No book deals. No press tour. Her silence remained her sharpest instrument and her strategy. Months later, at a private ethics summit in Geneva, she was asked what the defining moment of her leadership had been. She paused. Then answered, "The day I chose not to speak." Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. And sometimes it's the beginning of a reckoning. The room didn't applaud. They didn't have to. They understood. If this story shook something in you, that's not an accident, it's a mirror. How many Monica Harrisas are being rerouted right now? Not because they broke a rule, but because they disrupted a bias. How many systems are betting you'll stay silent so they don't have to change? Here's the truth: dignity doesn't beg. It builds leverage. Monica didn't yell. She didn't protest. She pulled the plug and made the whole damn airport blink. So what about you? Will you keep walking past injustice because it's inconvenient? Or will you be the reason it can't hide anymore? Comment below with the one moment in this story that hit you hardest. Tell us where you're watching from, because discrimination wears different uniforms in every zip code. Subscribe so you never miss another reckoning. And share this story if you're done watching power pretend to be policy. Because this isn't just storytelling, this is system breaking. And the next disruption might start with you.